NBA YoungBoy became one of the biggest rappers in the world while his father, Shahanda Golden Sr., spent 55 years in prison, missing every milestone along the way. Now, new details about his life behind bars reveal the true cost of that sentence. Here's the number that starts everything: 55 years. That's the sentence handed down to Jeffrey Staten, the father of Kentrell Golden, the artist the world knows as NBA YoungBoy. His dad was locked away for a robbery gone wrong, and he's still serving a 55-year prison sentence. Not a metaphor, not an exaggeration. 55 actual years for a robbery that went sideways. To put that number in perspective, a 55-year sentence handed to a man in his 20s or 30s is effectively a life sentence with extra steps. It means birthdays missed. It means graduations missed. It means a son's entire rise from a kid rapping into a cracked phone microphone to a global superstar happening entirely without him. His dad was sentenced to 55 years in prison when YoungBoy was just 8 years old. 8 years old. Think about that for a second. That's third grade. That's an age where most kids are worried about recess and cartoons, not about whether their father is ever coming home. When NBA YoungBoy was 8 years old, his father was arrested and sentenced to 55 years in prison for a robbery gone wrong, and his mother moved out of the neighborhood, leaving YoungBoy to be raised by his maternal grandmother. So right there, at 8 years old, Kentrell's entire family structure collapsed in one swoop. Dad gone for what amounts to the rest of his natural adult life. Mom gone from the neighborhood, and a grandmother left holding a household together. That wasn't hers to build in the first place. Now here's where it gets emotional. This isn't ancient history that the rapper has moved past. In the summer of 2023, years into his own fame, YoungBoy went on Instagram and posted something raw. He bared it all, posting a vulnerable message to his Instagram stories about his incarcerated father. This wasn't a publicist-approved statement. This was a grown man, one of the most streamed artists on the planet, sitting with his phone, thinking about his dad. A photo of a man who appears to be his father was used as the background of the post, and the words on top of it hit different. He wrote that no matter if he sees him in the right way or the wrong way again, he's gonna be smiling. Read that again. He's preparing himself for the possibility that he might never see his father outside of a visitation room. That's not a lyric written for a song. That's a son talking to his dad through a phone screen, because prison bars won't let him do it any other way. He kept going. He told him he went through the experience on his own, that his father built that one, meaning the pain, the situation, and signed off calling him by name. Jeff, not dad, not some rap alias. Jeff, a first name. The kind of thing you call somebody when the relationship has been stretched so thin by distance and time that dad almost feels too intimate for what's left. And this is the part that makes the story land. This wasn't him venting into a diary. He addressed his father directly, using social media to speak to his pops and to the public at the same time. Two audiences, one message. Millions of fans getting a window into a wound that's been open for over 15 years. So why did this post happen when it did? Context matters here. Around that same stretch, his mother had paid a visit to his home in Utah, amid his own house arrest at the time, and had done an interview talking about his upbringing. Family was clearly on his mind. His mom was speaking publicly about raising him. His dad was still sitting in a cell somewhere in Louisiana, with 55 years hanging over his head. The timing wasn't a coincidence. It was a young man processing, two different parents, living two very different lives, both of them shaping who he became. What's remarkable is how little has actually changed since that post. The father is still inside. The sentence hasn't been reduced, hasn't been appealed away, hasn't been quietly commuted. 55 years was the number in 2023, and by every account available, it remains the number today. No parole hearing making headlines, no resentencing story breaking. Just a man still incarcerated while his son's face is on billboards, and his son's songs rack up billions of streams. That's the split at the center of this story. One side of the family tree produced a kid who dropped out of school, bounced through a group home, got arrested himself as a teenager, and somehow turned all of that pain into one of the most commercially dominant rap careers of the decade. The other side of that same tree is a man who's been behind bars since his son was still losing baby teeth, aging inside a system that doesn't care how famous his last name becomes on the outside. And that contrast, the son's ascent against the father's decades-long stall, is really what makes this story worth sitting with, because it's not just rapper has a dad in prison. It's a story about what happens to a person when the clock simply stops. While the world outside kept moving, while his son grew up, dropped albums, got arrested and released himself, got married, had kids of his own. Jeffrey's day-to-day reality has, by all appearances, barely shifted at all. Still inside, still serving out a number that was handed to him, before his son could tie his own shoes. Before we get into what that actually looks like, the day-to-day reality of serving out a sentence like that, and how Kentrell's own life went in almost the opposite direction, we need to rewind and understand what was actually happening in that Baton Rouge household in the years right after the sentencing came down. Because the fallout from that one courtroom decision didn't just affect one person, it rerouted an entire childhood. When a father gets sentenced to more time than most people will live, the family left behind doesn't just grieve, they have to reorganize completely. That's exactly what happened to the Gaulden household in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Young boy, born Kentrell Deshawn Gaulden, was raised by his grandmother in North Baton Rouge, with his father gone and his mother, Shirhonda Gaulden, dealing with her own struggles. It fell to his grandmother to hold the family together. He's described his early childhood as hard but fun, saying they had to make it fun. That's a kid making the best of a situation nobody chose for him. It wasn't just the absence of his father that marked those years. At the age of 4, young boy broke his neck in a wrestling accident, and 3 deep scars still mark his forehead from wearing a halo brace. A broken neck at 4 years old, all while his father was either already gone or about to be. Physical pain layered on top of family upheaval before he was even old enough to fully process either one. His grandmother became the anchor. Everything in his childhood ran through her. He moved in around age 10 after his grandmother succumbed to heart failure and his birth mother temporarily left town. But underneath that sloped southern roof, young boy recorded his first song as a preteen on a cheap microphone that his grandmother purchased from Walmart. That detail says everything. A woman raising a grandson whose father was serving out a sentence longer than most people's entire lives, still finding money for a Walmart microphone because her grandson wanted to rap. And then the second gut punch, just when it seemed like the family had found a rhythm around this new normal. The one steady presence in his life was taken too. His path changed drastically when his grandmother died in 2010, and at the group home he was sent to afterward, he had a difficult time getting along with the other kids. Picture the timeline here. Father gone since age 8. Grandmother, the one raising him, gone by around age 10 or 11. That's 2 of the most important adults in a child's life disappearing within a few years of each other, one behind bars and one in a grave. He later described getting beat up inside the group home for no reason, recalling how the other boys would put their hands on him, and he'd look up wondering what he'd done, and how the experience made him discover a side of himself he never liked, the side that learned how to become someone people wouldn't want to test. That's a direct line you can draw. A kid who loses his father to a 55-year sentence, loses his grandmother to heart failure, ends up in a group home getting jumped by other kids, and comes out the other side having built armor. He added that before all of that, he never understood evil or wrongdoing because his grandmother had shown him so much love. That's about as clear a cause and effect as you'll find in any biography. Love, then loss, then survival mode. From there, things spiraled the way they often do for kids without a stable home. He dropped out of school while in the 9th grade, was taken to juvenile detention after being charged with robbery, and started writing lyrics for his debut project while serving that juvenile sentence. There's a haunting symmetry there. His father goes down for a robbery, and years later his son is picked up for the same charge. At 15 years old in the very same city, he was arrested for robbery and sent to a detention center in Tallulah, Louisiana. And it was from that detention center that he began writing lyrics for his debut project, a kid behind bars, writing rhymes about a life that had already handed him more grief than most adults experience in a lifetime. That's the origin story of the music that would eventually make him famous. Not a studio, not a mentor, but a juvenile facility. By the age of 14, he had begun producing his own music and released his debut mixtape, Life Before Fame, in 2014. The title alone tells you what he was thinking about. Life before fame. As in, everything that happened to him before anybody knew his name. The father in prison, the grandmother in the ground, the group home fights, the juvenile detention stint. That's the before, and it's the foundation every song after it was built on. What's striking is how quickly the music started resonating, specifically because it wasn't polished. It was a teenager narrating exactly what he'd lived through. His autobiographical style earned him a rapidly growing fan base in the South. People weren't listening because the hooks were catchy, though they were. They were listening because it felt real, because it was real. A kid rapping about a father he barely knew, because the state had taken him away for the better part of a century. By the time he'd adopted the name that would define his career, Never Broke Again, the meaning behind it wasn't abstract. It was a promise to himself, built directly out of the poverty and instability that followed his father's sentencing and his grandmother's death. Every subsequent success, the mixtapes, the record deal, the streaming numbers, sits on top of that foundation. And every time he's brought his father up publicly, even briefly, you can hear that same kid from North Baton Rouge underneath the superstar. That's the piece that gets lost when people just see the platinum plaques in the Billboard charts. The rise wasn't separate from the father's absence. It was fueled by it, which makes what happened next, as his career exploded while his father's situation stayed frozen in place, even harder to sit with. Here's where the story really splits into two lanes, running side by side, but heading in completely opposite directions. On one side, a father sentenced once at a young age to 55 years, a number that essentially guarantees he grows old and possibly dies behind bars, unless something dramatic changes. On the other side, a son who has been arrested repeatedly throughout his own adult life, and every single time has found his way back out into the world to keep building his career. Let's lay out just how different those two legal journeys have been. In 2014, NBA YoungBoy was just 15 years old when he was caught committing robbery. Already mentioned, but worth sitting on again because of what came after it. That charge didn't define the rest of his life the way his father's charge defined his. He did his time as a juvenile and came out the other side able to sign a record deal. Then the arrests kept coming, but so did the releases. In December of 2016, in Austin, Texas, he was arrested on suspicion of attempted first-degree murder in connection with an alleged drive-by shooting. And while in jail, he released 2 mixtapes before being released in May 2017 after taking a plea deal and posting bail. He was making music from inside a cell, the same way he had as a teenager, but this time he walked back out into a career that was already climbing. Gaulden had been given 3 years probation in 2017 for aggravated assault with a firearm in a non-fatal Baton Rouge shooting, and prosecutors later accused him of violating that probation after he was involved in a fatal shooting outside a resort in Miami, with a judge eventually sentencing him to 90 days in jail and banning him from performing for over a year. 90 days. Compare that to 55 years. It's not even in the same universe of consequence. In September 2020, a major drug bust led to 16 arrests, including NBA YoungBoy's, on charges of distribution and manufacturing of drugs and possession of stolen firearms. That case would hang over him for years, but it eventually resolved with him walking free again. He was ultimately sentenced to 23 months in federal prison for possessing a firearm as a felon, tied back to that 2020 arrest at 25 years old. 23 months, less than 2 years. And he didn't even serve all of it inside a traditional facility. He was released from a federal prison in Alabama and transferred to a residential reentry office in Phoenix, which manages detainees preparing for supervised home confinement, with his full release date landing in the following spring. Then came the pardon, the moment that made the gap between father and son impossible to ignore. Donald Trump pardoned NBA YoungBoy, who had been sentenced to 23 months in prison for possessing weapons as a felon. He was released from federal custody and had been under home confinement before the pardon came through. A presidential pardon, full clemency. His record, in a legal sense, effectively wiped clean of that federal case. He publicly thanked the president for the pardon, saying it gave him the opportunity to keep building as a man, a father, and an artist, calling the moment significant and saying it opened a door to a future he'd worked hard for. His tour agent told reporters he was now a fully free man with no travel restrictions, saying the world was at his fingertips. Sit with that phrase for a second. The world at his fingertips. Meanwhile, his father, the man whose absence shaped every single one of the struggles that pushed Cantrell toward music in the first place, remains, as far as any public record shows, still inside, still working through a sentence that was never going to end with a pardon phone call. There's no tour agent issuing statements about Jeffrey's freedom. There's no presidential clemency conversation happening for a state robbery conviction from decades ago. Those cases just don't move in the same circles, don't get the same attention, don't have the same lawyers or the same access. He even thanked the person he called the pardon czar, Alice Marie Johnson, for fighting for second chances for so many people, and his attorney, Brittany K. Barnett, for her work making the pardon possible. Second chances. That phrase hits different when you consider that his father, statistically, is running out of the years needed to ever cash in a second chance of his own, even if one theoretically became available. This is the engine of the whole story. It's not that NBA YoungBoy hasn't had his own brushes with the legal system. He's had plenty, arguably more arrests than most artists his age. But almost every single one of them ended in release, in a plea deal, in reduced time, or eventually in a pardon. His father's one case ended in 5.5 decades. The son's chaos kept producing chances. The father's one mistake produced almost none. And it's not just about luck or fame cushioning the blow, though that's clearly part of it. It's about timing, about jurisdiction, about the era in which each man was sentenced, about the resources available to fight a federal gun charge versus a state robbery charge from years earlier. Two men, same bloodline, same city roots. One gets a presidential pardon with a public statement, thanking a room full of lawyers and advocates. The other gets a Walmart microphone from a grandmother and a Christmas card energy Instagram post from a son years later, addressing him by his first name, because the word dad carries too much distance now. That contrast is the whole emotional weight of this story, and it sets up the next piece, which is arguably the hardest part to unpack, because while the son's life exploded into global fame, marriage, and a growing family, what has actually been happening day to day to a man serving out 55 years inside the Louisiana prison system. So what does 55 years inside actually look like, day after day, when the person serving it isn't the one with the platinum records and the pardon lawyers? Here's the uncomfortable truth about a sentence like that. It's not designed to have a next chapter. It's designed to be the whole rest of a life. For a man sentenced in his 20s or 30s, 55 years typically means dying inside, or at best, walking out an old man decades from now, into a world that has completely moved past him. Think about what that actually means practically. Every single milestone his son hit, he missed. After his grandmother passed away, Kentrell dropped out of 9th grade and began making music full-time, releasing his first mixtape by 15, recording in makeshift studios around Baton Rouge. His father wasn't there for any of that. Not the makeshift studio sessions, not the first mixtape drop, not the moment his son's name started buzzing around Baton Rouge. In 2017, he signed a 5-year deal with Atlantic Records and Artist Partner Group, a career-defining signature, and his father learned about it the same way any fan would, through word passed along, through news, through whatever access a man behind bars in Louisiana has to the outside world. No sitting in the room, no handshake, no pride shared in real time. Since breaking out from Baton Rouge at age 15, sounding like a world-weary veteran who'd absorbed a lifetime of pain, his son landed 96 entries on the Billboard Hot 126 projects on the Billboard 200, with 12 reaching the top 10 and 4 hitting #1, while being named the 3rd most streamed artist in the United States behind only Drake and Taylor Swift, and sitting at #1 on YouTube's top artist page for over 300 straight weeks. Every one of those numbers happened while his father sat inside, watching a clock that essentially doesn't move. For someone serving 5.5 decades, there's no furlough for your son's #1 album. There's no supervised release for a platinum plaque. The prison calendar doesn't care about the Billboard charts. His son went on to marry Jaslyn Michelle Hayes in 2023 and now has 11 or more children. 11 grandchildren by one count, that a man serving 55 years has to learn about through pictures, through phone calls, through whatever limited contact the system allows. Not through holding them, not through watching them grow up in person, not through being present for a single first birthday. This is what makes the earlier Instagram message so heavy in hindsight. When his son wrote that he'd be smiling whether he sees his father in the right way or the wrong way again, he wasn't being dramatic for engagement. He'd already opened up in an extensive Billboard profile about how his grandmother's death sent him into a group home where he was bullied, describing how the other boys would put their hands on him for no reason, and how that period taught him to become someone people wouldn't want to test. Because before then, he'd never understood evil or wrongdoing, having been showered with so much love by the one person who raised him. That one person wasn't his father, it was his grandmother. His father was already a distant figure by that point, present mostly as an idea, a name, a person locked somewhere behind a number. Nobody expected to shrink. And that's really the core of how his father has been living. Not through headlines about prison conditions or cell assignments, because those details haven't been made public, but through the sheer mathematics of the sentence itself. 55 years handed down when his son was 8. His son is now in his mid-20s. That means even in the best-case scenario of exact time served with no additional complications, there are still decades left on that sentence. Decades. Not years. Decades, stacked on top of the roughly 2 decades that have already passed. Meanwhile, the son who was once the 8-year-old absorbing that news has gone on to become, by several accounts, one of the most prolific chart performers in the history of the Billboard Hot 100, the youngest artist in history to chart 100 singles on the Hot 100, amassing over 15 billion YouTube views across his catalog. 15 billion views, a number so large it barely means anything on a human scale, generated entirely by an artist whose foundational trauma was a father's prison sentence that never budged. There's something almost unbearable about that juxtaposition when you slow down and actually look at it. A son who turned a father's absence into 15 billion views and a business empire. A father who turned one bad decision into a sentence that guarantees he'll likely never see the outside world again. As a free man in any meaningful sense. 2 lives that started on the same street in Baton Rouge, now separated by a wall that money, fame, and streaming numbers cannot buy through. It's worth remembering, too, that this isn't a story where the son abandoned the father emotionally, even with all that distance. The message on Instagram, unprompted, addressed directly to him, using his first name, shows a level of ongoing emotional attachment that a lot of people wouldn't extend to a parent who's been absent for the better part of 2 decades. He didn't erase him. He didn't pretend he didn't exist. He put his photo up in public and told him he'd still be smiling no matter how their next meeting goes. That's not closure. That's a kid, now grown into a man with his own kids, still carrying an open wound about a father he barely got to know. A father whose day-to-day existence, whatever it actually looks like inside those walls, remains almost entirely a mystery to the public, defined by nothing more than a number that refuses to get smaller. 55. So where does that leave things now? A father, still inside, still carrying that same sentence handed down. When his son was in elementary school, a son who's become one of the most commercially dominant artists of his generation, married, raising a household of his own kids, having received the kind of legal mercy, a presidential pardon, that his father's case was never positioned to receive. The gap between those 2 outcomes isn't going to close on its own. 55 years doesn't shrink because your son becomes famous. It doesn't shrink because millions of people stream his music or because a documentary crew shows up. Asking questions about the family, the number just sits there, unmoved by everything happening outside the walls it was written to keep someone inside. What's changed, if anything, is visibility. A story that used to live in the margins of a rapper's biography, a line item mentioned in passing. His father was incarcerated when he was young, has become something fans actively want to understand. People want to know what happened to the man behind the sentence, not just the son who turned that absence into art. That shift in attention matters, even if it doesn't change a single day of what the father is actually living through. It's also worth remembering how young this family's wounds still are, relative to how long they've been open. His father was incarcerated for most of his childhood, and his mother was largely absent, leaving him to be raised primarily by his maternal grandmother, who later passed away from a heart attack during his adolescence. That's 3 parental figures in some form, either gone, absent, or locked away, all before he was even old enough to drive. And out of that came a discography that's charted more entries than almost anyone in the genre's history. There's no tidy ending here, and that's probably the most honest thing to say about it. The father's sentence hasn't been overturned. There's been no headline-grabbing appeal, no resentencing hearing making waves the way the presidential pardon did for his son. As of now, the number remains 55, and the years already served haven't been enough to change that trajectory in any way that's been made public. What we do know is that the emotional thread between them hasn't been severed, even by all that distance and all that time. A son who could easily have let his father become a footnote instead chose, publicly and repeatedly, to bring him up. In interviews about his childhood, in cover stories about his upbringing, and in a raw, unscripted Instagram post that wasn't written for clout, but clearly written because he needed to say something to a man. He might spend the rest of his life visiting through glass, or not visiting at all. That tension between a son who made it out and a father who, by every available account, is still living inside a sentence that was designed to outlast him, is really the story underneath the story. It's not really about music charts or pardons or record deals. Those are just the visible parts, the parts that get press releases and headlines. The real story is about what happens to a family when one member gets a number attached to their name that's bigger than most people's entire adult lives. And everyone else left standing has to figure out how to build something out of what's left. Cantrell built a career, a marriage, a family, and a fortune out of the wreckage that sentence created. His father, as far as anyone on the outside can tell, is still there, still inside, still carrying that same number, while the son he raised for only 8 years watches his own kids grow up, in a way his father never got the chance to watch him grow up at all. That's not a plot twist. That's just where things stand, right now, in a story that's been unfolding. Since a courtroom in Louisiana handed down a sentence that was never built to end in anyone's lifetime.